One teacher's laugh nearly crushed a kid's confidence, but the truth showed up wearing a NASA badge. Have you ever heard someone say something that instantly changes the mood in the room, like a bad smell that won't go away? That's exactly what happened at Prescott Elementary, inside Ms. Worthington's third-grade class in Chandler, Arizona. It was Career Week, one of those yearly events where kids sit cross-legged on a reading rug while parents come in holding props, like stethoscopes, hard hats, or laptops. Some kids sat tall with pride, others looked down and stayed quiet. But everyone looked forward to it. It was a break from spelling tests and math drills. 8-year-old Jalen Brooks couldn't sit still that morning. He was small for his age, but sharp and full of energy. He talked with big eyes, like every word counted. And today, every word really did, because his dad was coming later that afternoon. So, when Mr. Denton asked the class to go around and say what their parents did for work, Jalen sat up straight like he'd been practicing all week. "My dad," he said, puffing out his chest, "works at NASA." There was a pause, not because no one understood, but because they didn't believe him. One kid let out a short laugh. Another whispered, "Yeah, right." But the teacher's reaction stung the most. Mr. Charles Denton, early 40s, thinning hair, khakis, and a tucked-in polo, let out a low chuckle. It wasn't loud, just quiet enough to feel insulting, the kind that makes you feel smaller. "NASA, huh?" he said, raising an eyebrow like Jalen had just claimed his dad built rockets in their backyard. "That's quite the imagination, Jalen. Maybe next time let's go for something a bit more realistic." A few kids giggled. One girl even repeated it softly. More realistic, like it was some inside joke. Jalen didn't say anything else. He stared at the rug, his sneakers tapped together, and the hands that had been moving so excitedly just moments ago were now clenched in small fists. Mr. Denton didn't notice. He just kept going, not realizing how Jalen's shoulders sank or how quiet he'd gotten. But someone did. Mila and Gwen, who sat next to him, leaned in. Mila whispered, "I believe you." Jalen didn't say anything back. He just nodded slightly, eyes still stuck to the floor. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Jacob's dad was a firefighter. Chloe's mom owned a bakery. Parents came and went. They got claps, hugs and thank yous. But Jalen just sat there, trying to blend into the carpet. At lunch, he didn't eat much. He didn't laugh when the boys did silly dances by the vending machines. He didn't run to the swings like he usually did. Something about that moment stuck with him. Not just the laugh or the doubt, but how easy it had been. How quickly a grown-up, someone who was supposed to lift him up, had brushed him off without even thinking twice. But what Mr. Denton didn't know was this. Jalen hadn't guessed. He wasn't lying. He didn't make it up to sound cool. Every word was true. His dad was an aerospace engineer working on a project that helped send messages between Mars and Earth. He wore a NASA badge every day, and he was proud of it. So was Jalen. But in that moment, none of it seemed to matter. Because to the teacher standing at the front of the room, the idea of someone like that being Jalen's dad just didn't seem possible. But the day wasn't over yet. And someone was about to walk into that classroom and change everything. His dad's work was complicated. Wires, systems, equations. But when it came to Jalen, he always made it easy to understand. He wanted his son to feel smart, even with big ideas. One night before bed, Jalen grabbed one of the NASA folders from his dad's desk and laid it on his bed like it was treasure. "Can I show this at school?" he asked. Kelvin looked at the folder. "I don't think I'm allowed to bring top-secret stuff to show and tell, buddy." "Not even one little page?" Kelvin sat down next to him. "You don't need the folder. You just need your voice. Just tell them what I do and tell them you're proud." Jalen paused. "What if they don't believe me?" Kelvin leaned back on one elbow. "Then that's their problem, not yours." "But what if they laugh?" Kelvin didn't answer right away. He wasn't the type to sugarcoat things. He knew how the world could be, especially for boys who looked like his son. "If they laugh," he said, "you hold your head high and remember this. The truth doesn't need applause, it just needs to be told. Jalen nodded slowly. He didn't fully understand, but he believed it anyway. That night, he wrote down everything he wanted to say during Career Week. He scribbled out words like orbit, spacecraft, and Mars relay in big bubble letters. He drew a picture of his dad holding Earth in one hand and a satellite in the other. He couldn't wait to share it. He even practiced in front of the bathroom mirror the next morning, pointing like his dad did when he explained things, even adding a joke about how bad space Wi-Fi was. But none of it mattered after Mr. Denton laughed. Back at school, Jalen didn't tell anyone what he had prepared. He tore up the drawing before recess, crumpled it, and shoved it deep into his backpack. It's strange how fast excitement can turn into embarrassment. One moment, you feel like you're on top of the world, and the next, you're counting down the minutes until you can go home and pretend none of it ever happened. Kelvin didn't know any of this. He had been in back-to-back meetings all morning, getting ready for his big presentation. He was putting together a slideshow for the class, something fun and easy to follow. It had cartoon rockets and photos of Mars, but his favorite slide was the last one, a picture of him and Jalen at the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab, both wearing matching badges and smiling wide. Back at Prescott Elementary, though, Jalen wasn't smiling anymore, because sometimes all it takes is one comment from the wrong person to make a kid question everything. After lunch, the day felt like it slowed down. Mr. Denton tried to go back to normal, spelling words, math problems, but every now and then he looked over at Jalen. And Jalen never looked back. He wasn't pouting, he wasn't crying, he was just quiet. Quiet in a way that didn't fit a kid his age. Like something inside him had turned off. Mila noticed, a few other kids did too, but nobody said anything. Maybe they didn't know how. Career presentations were set for the last hour of the day. So when 1:30 came, Mr. Denton started moving desks into rows and rolled the whiteboard to the front of the room. Parents waited outside, ready to be called in one by one. Jalen watched the clock more than he watched the presentations. First came Chloe's mum with cupcakes and cookie-shaped business cards from her bakery. Then Thomas's uncle, a mechanic, brought a tire pressure gauge and passed it around like it was made of gold. The kids clapped, laughed, asked questions. And Jalen, he just sat there, palms sweaty, knees bouncing, hoping, begging, praying that his dad wouldn't get stuck in traffic or cancel or forget. Because if Mr. Denton saw him walk in wearing a real NASA badge, maybe, just maybe, he'd finally believe. But under all that hope, there was doubt. The kind that doesn't ask questions, the kind that just whispers things that hurt. What if he doesn't show up? What if Mr. Denton was right? What if my dad's not who I think he is? He is. Jalen shook his head like he could shake those thoughts away. At the front of the room, Mr. Denton stood by the door with a clipboard in hand. Every now and then, he stepped out to wave in the next parent. He was back in his comfort zone, smiling, leading, telling safe little jokes. But something about him had changed. When he called on the other kids, he looked over at Jalen once or twice. His jaw moved like he wanted to say something, but the words got stuck somewhere inside. Maybe he knew he had gone too far. Maybe it hit him when he saw how quiet Jalen had gone after that one comment. But he didn't apologize, not then. He just kept the day moving forward. 15 minutes left, 4 parents to go. Jalen was now checking the door every few seconds, waiting for his dad's silhouette, the tie, the jacket, the calm, steady walk. He pictured it like a scene in a movie. Only now he wasn't sure how that movie would end. Up next we have, Mr. Denton said, looking at his list. But he stopped mid-sentence. The door had already opened, and there he was, Dr. Kelvin Brooks. He stepped into the room in a navy blue blazer, white shirt, slacks, and a NASA badge clipped to his chest. His hair was neatly cut, grey at the edges. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on his son. Jalen sat up so fast his chair scraped the floor. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Kelvin gave a small nod. No big smile, just calm and steady. "Hello," he said clearly. "I'm Dr. Brooks. I designed spacecraft." And just like that, the whole room went still, not with laughter, not with confusion, with realization. But one person wasn't ready to understand what had just happened. Mr. Denton. He stood at the front holding a clipboard he suddenly didn't want anymore. When Kelvin walked in, no one clapped or gasped. No one had to. The silence said everything. He didn't need props or flashy slides. He had his voice, his badge, his presence, the fact that he existed in a space where most of the kids, and definitely Mr. Denton, didn't expect someone like him to be. Mr. Denton blinked. His lips parted like he was about to say something, but couldn't find the words. Jalen kept staring. Eyes wide, he could hardly believe what he was seeing. And deep down, a small part of him had started to believe maybe his dad wasn't coming, not because he thought his dad didn't care, but because when someone important doubts you, it messes with your head, especially when you're a kid. But Kelvin had come. Not just on time, he had been early. He had waited right outside the door. He had heard everything. He walked to the front of the classroom slowly, like he wasn't trying to prove anything. He looked at Mr. Denton and gave him a calm, polite nod. Then he turned to the class. "So," he said, "you guys learning about jobs today?" One kid raised a hand. "Do you fly rockets?" Kelvin chuckled. "Not quite. I help build the systems that let rockets talk to us after they leave Earth. Think of it like this. Spacecraft eat phones. And we build the phones." Another kid raised their hand. "Like space iPhones?" Kelvin grinned. "Sure, but with really bad reception." The class laughed. Even Jalen smiled. Kelvin clicked a button and showed a picture on the screen, satellites from the Mars Relay Project. Another photo showed him standing in front of a big control panel. "What you're looking at," he explained, "is part of how we stay in touch with robots on another planet. We help them call home." The kids leaned in, one by one, except Mr. Denton. He stood off to the side, silent, his eyes shifting from the screen to Kelvin, then to Jalen. Jalen now sat taller than he had all day. Kelvin didn't bring up what had happened earlier. He didn't need to. Just being there had already said more than enough. But just before he wrapped up, he paused. He looked right at the class. "By the way," he said, voice calm, "I heard someone earlier say that working at NASA might be unrealistic." He let the word hang in the air. Then he turned to Jalen. "Well," he said, "I guess some people have a different definition of realistic." And then, finally, he smiled. Jalen beamed. For the first time all day, his fists relaxed. He looked around and noticed everything had changed. The smirks were gone. Now there were wide eyes, nods, maybe even a few kids who looked impressed. Even Milo whispered, "Told you so." Mr. Denton cleared his throat. "Thank you, Dr. Brooks. That was informative." Kelvin nodded, checked the clock. "I've got to head back. Mars doesn't like to be kept waiting." The kids laughed again. As he walked past Mr. Denton toward the door, he stopped just for a second. "I hope your students always feel heard," he said softly, "especially the ones who dream big." And then he was gone. But the tension he left behind, that stayed. And now it was up to Mr. Denton to figure out what to do with it. Mr. Denton stood still for a full moment after Dr. Brooks walked out. One hand held the clipboard, the other just hung at his side, like he didn't know what to do with it anymore. He turned back to the class, but the control he usually had was gone. The kids weren't looking at him, they were looking at Jalen. And Jalen, he was glowing. Not in a loud, "look at me" kind of way. Just calm. His shoulders relaxed, chin up, like someone who had finally been seen the way they deserved to be. "All right," Mr. Denton said, voice thinner than usual. "Let's thank Dr. Brooks for coming." A few kids clapped. Mila started it, others followed. Mr. Denton tried to move on like nothing had changed, but the room felt different now. He started introducing the next parent, but you could hear it in his voice. He knew whatever came next would fall flat. No one cared about tire gauges or bakery cupcakes anymore. They had just seen a man walk in and break every assumption that had been sitting in that classroom all year. After the last presentation, Mr. Denton dismissed the class. Backpacks zipped, chairs scraped, the usual noise filled the room. But Jalen didn't move. He just sat at his desk, hands folded, waiting. When most of the kids had gone and the hallway got louder, Mr. Denton walked over. He stood beside Jalen's desk, shifting from one foot to the other. "Hey," he started, trying to sound casual. "Your dad seems like a pretty smart guy." Jalen looked up, slowly. "He is." Mr. Denton nodded. "I can see that. I wanted to say, I may have jumped the gun earlier." Jalen didn't say anything. Mr. Denton cleared his throat. "What I meant to say is, sometimes teachers, people, make mistakes. We don't always realize when something we say comes out wrong." Jalen looked at him. "But you laughed." That landed. Mr. Denton's face tightened. "Yeah," he admitted. "I did. And I'm sorry for that. It wasn't right. I should have listened." Jalen still didn't nod. He didn't make it easier. Mr. Denton finally said, "I hope you'll give me a chance to do better." Jalen stood up slowly, slung his backpack over one shoulder. As he reached the door, he looked back and said, "It wasn't your imagination. That's really my dad." Then he walked out. Mr. Denton stayed there, one hand on the empty desk, the other now shoved in his pocket. The classroom was quiet again. But something had changed. Not just the space. Him. Because what happened wasn't just about being wrong. It was about what a careless moment could do to a kid's belief in himself, in his family, in his own voice. And now Mr. Denton couldn't stop hearing the words he'd said. Maybe next time we aim for something more realistic. It hadn't just been a comment. It was a boundary, one he had tried to put on a child's imagination, and it backfired. Not every apology is said out loud, and not every lesson has an audience. That evening, the Arizona sun was dipping below rooftops. The sky was painted orange and pink. Jalen sat at the kitchen table, eating a bowl of cereal for dinner, his choice. Kelvin leaned against the counter, sipping from an old mug that read, "Space Nerd," in faded letters. They didn't talk much at first. It wasn't awkward, just quiet. Then Jalen looked up. "Did you hear him?" Kelvin raised an eyebrow. "Your teacher?" Jalen nodded. "When I said you worked at NASA?" He laughed, like it was a joke. Kelvin didn't answer right away. He set the mug down, walked over, and sat across from his son. "Yeah," he said finally. "I heard." Jalen frowned. "Why do people do that?" Kelvin's voice was soft. "Because sometimes people see the world in a small box, and when something doesn't fit inside, they laugh. It's not always hate. Sometimes it's just ignorance. But either way, it's not your job to shrink for them." Jalen stirred his cereal slowly. "I didn't feel smart anymore." Kelvin leaned in, his voice serious now. "Don't let someone else's doubt erase your truth. You know who you are. You know who I am. That's what matters." Jalen nodded, just a little. "And you did good today," Kelvin added. "You told the truth. You held your ground. That's brave." Jalen gave a small smile. The next morning at school, something had shifted. Kids who laughed the day before now wanted to sit next to him. One asked if his dad had met an astronaut. Another asked if Jalen could bring in a space tool. He didn't brag, didn't act different, just answered simply and kept it moving. Mila walked beside him at recess. "They believe you now," she said. Jalen shrugged. "They didn't have to." Mila grinned. "Still nice, though." In the staff lounge, Mr. Denton sat alone for a while. Then he folded up a sheet of paper and dropped it into Jalen's cubby. It wasn't typed, wasn't formal, just a note. Jalen found it after lunch. It read, "Jalen, I was wrong. You shouldn't have had to prove anything to us. Keep dreaming big, Mr. Denton." Jalen didn't smile, didn't read it twice. He folded it back up, slipped it into his backpack, and zipped it quietly. He hadn't needed the apology, but maybe someone else had needed to write it. That afternoon, as the final bell rang, Jalen walked out with his head high. Not because of what the class thought now, but because of what never changed. His dad had shown up. He was an engineer, and most important of all, he had told the truth, even when no one believed him. And somewhere in that classroom, a teacher had been reminded of something he'd forgotten. Kids carry dreams bigger than most adults' expectations. And when we dismiss those dreams, we don't just shrink their imagination, we shrink their voice. But Jalen's, it stayed loud and clear and real, because the truth doesn't need permission. It just needs someone brave enough to say it out loud. And if you've ever been doubted, overlooked, or told to be more realistic, remember this: other people's limits don't define your path. Keep showing up, keep speaking your truth, and if you ever get the chance to believe in someone when no one else does, do it. You might just change everything.